Hope everyone had a chance to recharge, get a little bit of coffee, and start up. So we start up for our first panel of the day today, which is going to be focused on grid security issues. We got a tremendous group of experts here to talk about these issues with us. And I'm going to start off by introducing our moderator, who's Brian Harrell. Brian is the VP and Chief Security Officer for Wires member Avangrid. Thank you for being here and for leading our discussions today, Brian, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, let you introduce the panel and get us started.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks for having us. Larry, you could not have picked a better location, that is for sure. Thank you. A lot of great folks in here, a lot of friends, a lot of decision makers in here, and frankly, if we're not careful, we might solve some issues in here today. I'll be honest. Up here on the panel, just some of the best in industry, period. Full stop. Best in industry. So I think you're in for a bit of a treat. You're all caffeinated up, but hopefully we'll add a little bit of adrenaline to your day as well, talking about cybersecurity, physical security, national security related issues. And here we are in North Carolina, where they've had recently some issues. We'll talk a little bit about that, but really step back at the 85,000 foot level and talk about where are we going? What is happening in the next 1, 3, and 5 years? So as we start to build out our budgets for response, recovery, resilience, cybersecurity, national security, how do we need to spend money moving forward? So let me just stop there for a moment and introduce the panel. I've got some great folks up here. I am not going to introduce them necessarily. They're going to introduce themselves because they have an illustrious career, great resumes. So please, Spence.
Spencer Wilcox. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for NextEra Energy. We have Florida Power and Light within our footprint, and this is my third utility. So I've been doing cybersecurity for my entire adult life at this point. So,
hey everybody, Martin Strasburger. I am the Chief Security Officer at Duke Energy. Been here for a year and a half. This is actually our service territory here in Asheville. I'm based in Charlotte. We operate in 7 states: Florida, North Carolina, South Carolina, Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana. So prior to that, I was with Pacific Gas and Electric for 10 years, Chief Information Security Officer there. And then before that, I was with Deloitte. So, similar to Spencer, been doing cybersecurity my whole life, and was lucky enough to get physical security last December, just in time for the Moore County substation shooting event that I'll be happy to talk about today. Manny.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Great to be here with you today. I'm Manny Cancel. I'm the CEO of the Electricity Information Sharing and Analysis Center, the ISAC, a stakeholder organization of over 1,800 members, utility asset owners and operators, and we are the clearinghouse for physical and cybersecurity information. I have spent 43 years in the electricity and energy industry, which makes me the youngest person on this panel. But in a variety of roles, operations, customer service, and I was the CIO at Con Ed before I joined NERC.
Well, thank you. And just a little bit about myself. Before coming to Avangrid, I was the Assistant Secretary at the Department of Homeland Security under the previous administration. Spent some time at Duke Energy, spent some time at NERC as well. So I think everyone up here is well-versed to answer some of your questions today. Speaking of, the first one. I get the easy job today, actually. I just get to ask a bunch of questions and kind of nod my head in concurrence, right? But Martin, to you first. Yep. Duke, you guys have been in the news a bit recently, locally, but even nationally. You guys are, I think, one of the finest utilities in the country, if I do say so myself, and have a great cybersecurity, physical security, national security program. You've made the right investments over the last number of years. Nonetheless, it doesn't stop you from being in the press, sometimes in very negative ways. So with respect to the Moore County shootings, is there an update? Have you made some wholesale changes? Are you moving along as business as normal? Or what investments are you making?
Yeah, no, good question. So I think everybody knows it was December of last year. 2 of our substations in Moore County, which is around the Pinehurst area in central North Carolina, were sabotaged, gunshot attack. There were actually 2 substations. Interestingly enough, one of the substations, the substation that got hit first, was severely damaged, but the second substation was actually a transmission substation, West End, that was a radial feed to 5 additional substations. So that was really the biggest impact. Bad actors shot up the variety of equipment, including transformer cooling components. That resulted in us having to shut down those substations. We, as rapidly as possible, executed emergency recovery activities. We actually had to find and disassemble a transformer at another substation, truck it over, rebuild it, test it, bring it back up. Took us about 5 days to get 45,000 customers back up. But importantly, so what's changed? What are we doing about it? I would say first and foremost, we reassessed our substation criticality tiering. Like basically all of my peers, we have a tiered risk-based structure. Very typically, your top tier is your NERC SIP 14 critical transmission assets, and then tier 2 and tier 3 that are also critical and impactful to the Duke Energy service territory. But here's the big change. We had a 4th tier of transmission substations. There's about 3,000 substations in that tier, and those were not considered as critical to the bulk electric system. The disruption of those assets would not cause anything other than outages to customers who were connected. And just like Moore County, that substation being taken out didn't cause anything other than the very bad outage of 45,000 customers. So typically we had protected those. Really it was more of a protect the assets so that the public doesn't get in and hurt themselves. We weren't really protecting those assets against a targeted attack. Well, we think that the threat landscape and Manny's ISAC team is always putting out good threat intelligence, and we had seen increase in physical security vandalism or even sabotage over the last 18 months or so. And we really do assess that that is going to continue. And so we have now established, I'll say we took that 4th tier and added another tier. We actually said 200 of these 3,000 substations are large enough, important enough, serve enough customers, serve critical customers, such that we actually have to really do more to protect them. So we are doing physical security related uplifts. We're deploying camera technology, connecting it to our 24/7 monitoring center, ground-based radar. We are working not just on security but resilience. So our grid operations team is staging spare parts and refreshing their rapid repair plans and things like that. So I'd say the main thing, Brian, really is that we need to think about the most important of those previously less critical assets in a different manner and protect them against attack and not just against sort of public injuring themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think after April 16, 2013 and the Metcalf attack, there was this immediate knee-jerk reaction by FERC. Within 90 days, NERC, you shall go out and create SIP 14, but it was all focused on the integrity and the reliability of the bulk power system, right. Period.
Yep.
And now, if we have the crystal ball out, my words, not yours, and that is, we seem to see this pendulum swinging to less reliability of the system, the integrity of the system, and more towards, we have some really important customers that we care about. We don't necessarily want to be in the media. We have some industrial customers that we care about. Maybe that's defense industrial bases, maybe it's large customers kind of thing. And that now is starting to be a larger focus in our evaluation. Is that fair?
100%. It's yes, everything that we've been doing to protect the bulk electric system, now also add on the protect these critical customers. Mm-hmm. And, just bottom line, it absolutely costs more money. We have a 4-year, $400 million capital investment plan to implement these physical security capabilities I'm talking about. And I have to increase the size of my team to be able to monitor and respond. So yes, we are now also having to do this, and we should. And it costs money to do it, which I think is, businesses are going to have, utilities are going to have to come to grips with. Now, there aren't any concrete laws or regulations right now that forces you to do it. So I think some are sort of waiting and seeing if there will be. Our CEO said, we're going to get out in front of this. We got to lead on this. This happened to us. We didn't ask for it to happen to us, but we got to respond and take action and not wait to be ordered by regulators.
How has the state of North Carolina and or local law enforcement been a good partner, or are there some opportunities for improvement there?
Great partner. Very happy with really all of our regulatory commissions, but we're headquartered in North Carolina, and so the North Carolina Public Utilities Commission, super supportive. They, of course, have engaged with us, wanted to understand what happened, what we're doing about it. They absolutely have our backs. What do you need from us? They ask us, like they should, ensure that you are as cost effective as possible to keep rates reasonable, totally reasonable. And then law enforcement, we're lucky enough too to have law enforcement in the state. Our patrols, drive by, observe suspicious activity, go investigate, report it to fusion centers, and don't just, that important substation isn't just some other piece of private property. Help us protect it. They're very, very willing to do that.
Manny, we've seen some reports come to the ISAC and DOE to a greater extent as well, suggesting that physical and sabotage style attacks are up 71% over the last couple years. If you break out your crystal ball, are those numbers going to remain flat? Are we going up? Have we engaged the community enough and mitigated this threat to where we start seeing numbers go down? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think it's going to continue to go up, and there's still an opportunity to engage the communities, whether it's the regulatory community, law enforcement, and actually I do want to commend Marty and his team at Duke. They did a great job responding to the Moore County incident. And what's not easy when you're under that kind of pressure to be transparent about what's going on and sharing with the broader sector so we could maintain situational awareness was really helpful. But as well as lessons learned, and I think they are setting the model for how utilities can move forward and address these sort of risks. But Brian, back to your question, after the Moore County, so we've been tracking physical security incidents for time immemorial, right? We did a more exhaustive analysis over the last 3 years, which, to no surprise, concluded that physical security incidents are in fact increasing significantly. Ballistic incidents are increasing significantly. Targeting substations, right, with the intent to sabotage. Strong correlation between the election periods, right? The presidential election in 2020, and we saw it again last year in the midterm elections. And again, we know that activists and domestic violence extremists use disrupting critical infrastructure as an arrow in their quiver, and will continue to do so, right? They continue to advertise it, right? And so we not only saw this in Moore County, we saw other clusters in the Southeast. We saw another one in the Pacific Northwest. You saw the FBI had foiled a plot in Baltimore that had the potential for also causing widespread damage. So yeah, unfortunately, we think this will continue. But it underscores the need to do everything that Marty said. Work closely with our partners in law enforcement across the chain, federal, state, local. Work with our regulatory partners and to sort of, influence policy in a productive way, because we can't protect everything. And protecting everything is just going to drive up costs. It's got to be done in a risk-based, strategic way, so we buy down the risk.
Spencer, post-colonial attack, post-SolarWinds attack, some big muscle movement attacks that we've seen over the last number of years, we have seen this default by at least this administration and USG in general to try and gravitate more towards regulation. Is that your interpretation? Does a rising tide, in fact, lift all boats? Can we regulate good security?
So, thanks for asking the question. I think certainly you can see the White House has set out an RFI on new cybersecurity regulation just in the last week. We saw the SEC yesterday make statements about reporting, cyber reporting specifically, and how boards should interact on cybersecurity. We've also seen the creation of Wells notices for solar winds just over the course of the last few weeks, demonstrating what was said in the new National Cybersecurity Strategy, which is let's build case law that shows, let's the U.S. government, that is, build case law to start proving and creating product liability for cybersecurity. Clearly, there's a regulatory path here, whether or not we support it. But the answer from my perspective is regulation has been, in this industry, a long pole in the tent. Sorry, I always get that one wrong. A long pole in the tent for our whole industry. We've had NERC for a number of years. We have been regularly regulated since the inception of our businesses. We're starting to see state-by-state regulation created for cybersecurity specifically and for physical security. The outcome of that, though, has not been to make us more agile. It's been to set a group of standards for how we apply cybersecurity programs across our enterprises and our industry. Where I think we've had the most success, though, in thwarting those kinds of events have been in the non-regulated side. On the enterprise side, it's in the lead up to getting into the SIP-regulated areas of our businesses. So what we've done is we've been able to create programs that have stopped the bad guy long before they ever get to the critical systems by creating defense in-depth processes across our industry. And I hope that in those RFIs or in that RFI response that will go out, we'll begin to see conversations about effective cybersecurity strategies that allow us to remain agile in the face of an ever-evolving adversary.
You know, I think I could not agree more. And I think right now, too, this industry, we are regulated 3 ways to Sunday. In the energy space, I don't think we need any more regulation. But I will say that from a NERC SIP perspective, and Manny, I'm not looking in your direction on this. But NERC SIP for us is interesting. We do it. It's a check in the box. But if we are leaning purely on NERC SIP, we have problems. You know, we are going well beyond and looking at our third-party supply chain. We're looking at China. We're doing insider threats. We're understanding data loss prevention, data exfiltration, what's leaving our proprietary IT systems and what's going to somebody's Gmail, a competitor, and or a nation-state adversary overseas, right? And so this is, I think, the maturity that we're all trying to seek out. Martin, is Duke moving in that same direction as well?
Yep, 100%. And I agree on there are plenty of regulations out there. I actually I'm hopeful that this harmonization effort might lead somewhere, but if anything, I'm thinking there's probably just more regulations out there. It would be great if we could have some sort of a standard we could gravitate to and be able to then apply that across our business and show that we're doing the right things regardless of state or federal regulations in the areas. But to your point, us, security leaders in the business absolutely don't just sit there and say, for example, NERC SIP requires us to do this and that's good enough. We absolutely go above and beyond. I like how Spencer described, since really the corporate side of the house isn't really regulated per se, we've all built out mature security programs, defense in-depth security operations centers, and we're bringing a lot of those good practices into the operational side of the house. Just an example would be Duke Energy has an ongoing operational technology security program that is deploying some of the same technologies, next generation firewalls, security information event management systems, and the like into our operational environments, and then utilizing some of our best practices around 24/7 threat monitoring, incident response.
Sensor technology.
Intelligence-driven defense in those areas. We also know that IT and OT have differences, and you cannot just jam a bunch of traditionally IT-related equipment in there. We get that. But you absolutely can use those technologies and techniques to put some good quality security controls into that environment. So that's, yes, we're all going above what the regulations require and managing our risk to the level that we see fit at the company.
Manny, I'm going to ask you a couple questions because I know you have to leave here pretty soon to catch a flight. ETAC. We've heard a lot about it. DOE keeps kind of preaching from the mountaintops on this ETAC and it kind of being the future of information sharing. The Energy Threat Assessment Center, eventually some sort of a brick and mortar type center in Denver, Colorado. From your perspective, leading the ISAC, is it needed? Is it a good thing? Is it redundant? And probably more importantly, how does it differ from what the ISAC is already doing?
Yeah, so it's a good question, Brian, and thanks for that. So it's the Energy Threat and Analysis Center, which is a pilot program that the Department of Energy, the Caesar Group in the Department of Energy, has enacted. Essentially, it's very nascent. So we have 4 utilities and the ISAC participating. Essentially, what it is a collaboration to sort of assess threats to the electricity sector. So typically in a classified space, we've got our analysts and the DOE analysts and DOE intel sort of poring over the threats that are facing us and deciding how we should inform the industry and also what steps we should take. I do think it's a needed thing, especially in this complex threat landscape, because as you said before, the universe of threats is overwhelming, right? So to sort of focus on the most critical threats of the sector, I think it's helpful to have those sort of conversations. We've been using this construct actually going back to the last quarter of 2021 and started, these sort of discussions just prior to the invasion of Russia by Ukraine, right? And there have been numerous sort of other incidents that we've responded to, the physical security attacks, supply chain threats, other software vulnerabilities, particularly those in key industrial control systems. Supply chain, not just foreign manufactured transformers, but things that can go wrong with any transformer, right? And so those have been outputs that have come out from the ETAC. The plan there is legislation in the Senate to sort of move this ahead and procure the funding that they need to grow the program, but the plan is to grow the program across critical energy infrastructure sectors, expand it across the electricity sector. Not that we're going to have every utility participating in the ETAC or having butts and seats there, but again, making sure that there's a more representative sample of utilities there, or maybe even rotating folks through there as well too. But again, so far so good, more to come. We'll continue to share more information on this as we go forward.
I think the ISAC does an excellent job of sharing information. It's kind of the tenet or the foundation of the ISAC. I think it's even in the name, right? But you're also competing with the FBI and DHS and DOE Caesar and you name the 3-letter organization in Washington, D.C. that's constantly pushing out information. From a utility perspective, the amount of information sharing today is almost like white noise. It's so much coming at you that it's difficult to prioritize. And so from your seat again, how would you suggest utilities prioritize information to understand that, if everything is important, then nothing is important? And so how do you kind of rack and stack?
Yeah, so look, we actually don't want to compete. We recognize that there are many sources of information, whether it is the federal agencies or the service providers that you use, and let's face it, they provide value too. I think the ISAC is in a unique spot in that it can aggregate information and sort of, bring it together and say, this is what it means to the electricity sector. You enumerated all the threats that we're dealing with, right? And, when I get this question, what I try to say is, all those things are important, but a couple of basics, right? You can't protect what you don't know about, right? So you need a good inventory of your assets, particularly your OT assets. You really need to protect your perimeter, right? Your internet presence. Those are sort of the priority, sort of good spinach sort of practices that we need to focus on. You mentioned supply chain as well and the supply chain threats. Having an inventory of your partners, your most critical partners, because we have thousands of partners, and understanding what their capabilities are from a security perspective. And just continuing to have that dialogue. And, Martin said this before, the outreach to our customers, our legislators, our law enforcement colleagues, right, is critical, right? It is a team sport, to use a cliche, and I think those are the things we focus on. So you asked before, and I didn't answer this question, is there duplicity between the ETAC and the ISAC? I'd say not really, right? But, look, our focus is sharing timely and actionable information, but not overwhelming. So you've actually seen a reduction in the amount of information that we've been sharing over the last year, to try to, reduce some of that signal to noise or address the signal to noise issue.
So given that reduction, my interpretation of that now is when I see something from the ISAC, it's important enough for you to send it out.
Well, I'd still say we are on the side of making sure we get information out, right? But what we've done is, let's say to things that aren't as important, we sort of aggregate it and say, hey, you might want to look at these. But when we need to ring the bell, we ring the bell. Like, hey, pay attention to this. This is really important. So we have a construct that we call an all points bulletin that we stole from law enforcement, that says, hey, look, this is important, right? We have alerts that we can use from NERC, but we try to stay away from that because they generally have a different connotation. But we'll still use that when necessary. But it is really just doing a better job of sort of saying, here's what's important, and working with our partners in the government to sort of make sure that there's alignment around that, right? So, recently you heard about the Volt Typhoon Chinese threat actor, right? That came from the NSA, right? And the ISAC doesn't generate intelligence. We're a conduit to push intelligence out. When something like that comes out, we really make sure that we sensitize the sector, even though you may know about it, right?
Spencer, NextEra, Florida Power and Light, pretty darn important utility down in the South, especially during hurricane season and things like that. And information sharing, I know, is central to your foundational success. But you have the ISACs, you have fusion centers, you have local law enforcement, state law enforcement, federal law enforcement, intelligence partners. How are you, in the new ETAC, how are you consuming this information, and how are you prioritizing and racking and stacking from a utility perspective?
So it's a great question. When you think about it, the foundation for Florida Power and Light's success in dealing with all of those natural disasters that we do deal with, and we deal with well, has been mutual assistance, and it's been focusing on what really matters, which is resilience and hardening. So we're building systems that are better defensible, more defensible. We're building systems that can be restored quickly after an event. And then, most importantly, we're working with those partners to ensure that we understand what's coming. So knowing that, for instance, ISAC is going to produce a number of reports on phishing on a given day, that's helpful information. I can ingest that in an automated fashion, and I can put my automated defenses into a monitoring mode for those things. However, when we start getting into some of the more esoteric information sharing practices within the industry, the cyber risk information sharing program that many of us participate in, and that's widely available to our industry, this gives us a little bit more investigative support for the decision making that we can then apply to our business. So, for instance, my first priority, if I get a CRISP alert, Cyber Risk Information Sharing Program alert, we're acting right now, no matter what, 100% of the time. If I'm getting an ISAC alert, we're ingesting that as an automated indicator, unless it's relevant to something that's specifically going on that we may not be able to ingest automatically, in which case we will evaluate it and make decisions. But the ETAC and other the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative, for instance, these are opportunities for us to evaluate and better position ourselves over a time period by using strategic intelligence as opposed to that very tactical intelligence that tells us there's somebody knocking on your door. We're not looking for the knocks on the door anymore because hopefully we've already planned for those. And that's the goal of strategic intelligence. It's knowing where to position ourselves so that we catch them long before they ever get to the door. And I think that's how I think about these various programs. It's how do I position myself ahead of this information so that I'm not reliant upon what Manny's doing at the last second. We're already well prepared and well in advance of the bad guy showing up.
Spence, back to you, and then over to Martin. In terms of what risks or what threats are you focused on right now as you're building, and maybe you're educating us all on your budget for the next 1, 3, and 5 years from now, where are you investing? Where are you trying to gravitate your program to mitigate and drive down risk?
So, I think one of the interesting things about our industry, again, is we've got this long history of mutual assistance. If there's a hurricane, we roll trucks. We show up on each other's doorsteps. We help to restore services. And that was nowhere in evidence like the response to Hurricane Ian. We were able to restore in the fastest time ever. You think I'm dissembling? Give me a second. I promise to bring it back together. So the reason I mentioned that, though, is we have a cyber mutual assistance program, and where we're really focusing our spend and our efforts is on developing those around us so that we can be the tide that lifts all ships. My grid may be perfectly secure. I'm sure it's not. Right? Let's just go ahead and start there. We're doing the best that we can. But the person next to us, we're just as dependent upon. And we've got to lift the ecosystem of all of the participants in our region to ensure that we're better protecting the entirety of the grid. As Marty talked about earlier, right? When you guys experienced this in Moore County, you were looking at one small area of the state. You didn't think that it was critically important. Well, those munis, co-ops, small utilities may not have the same resources we do. How can we help them? How can we elevate them? How can we assist them to get better? Because if they collapse, we're going to have challenges too. So with that said, where do we invest? We invest in education, we invest in training, we invest in developing our people. We also invest in developing our partnerships. Last but not least, we invest in technology and automation. We look at artificial intelligence as both an acute, fundamental new risk that we have to monitor, but also an acute, fundamental new business model that will help us to elevate the capabilities of our entire organization and to better position ourselves against an ever-evolving threat actor.
Martin, I guess similar question. Where are you investing, and maybe how do you advocate the rest of us invest?
Yep. So I had mentioned, of course, the large investment in hardening some of our substation infrastructure. That's our single largest investment, but it also includes a broader pivot to technology. So we have been very happy with some camera and analytics solutions that we've purchased. So we're actually thinking we are going to be less of a, invest millions of dollars in, large 12-foot tall fences, no dig, no climb that cost, millions of dollars, and more focused on utilization of advanced cameras with facial recognition, motion detection, license plate readers, and backhauling that data back to our 24/7 monitoring center so that we can, for example, maybe catch a bad actor who is doing pre-operational surveillance on a site and disrupt something. So we're pivoting to technology on the physical side. And, maybe a risk that a lot of people don't think about when they think about security, we actually have, we call it adverse customer. You wouldn't believe, well, you probably would believe because we're in the same business, the amount of threat that's out there to our workforce. Mm-hmm. Every single day, and I hate to get it, but I get my report every day that'll list 1, 2, 3, 4 adverse customer situations. My utility crew showing up at somebody's house to repair a line, and homeowner comes out and has a shotgun and says, "Get off my property," or shooting our drone down. I mean, the protection of our workforce against adverse customers is something that worries me greatly because I do not want anybody to get harmed. So we're doing things like using our geographical information system and denoting that customer as an adverse customer. We will, for example, have law enforcement escort the worker next time, things like that. On the cyber front, I'd say a resilience and recovery. We're deploying better backup and recovery solutions this is really driven out of, I don't want to call it knee-jerk, but the ransomware of the last couple of years sort of made everybody think about, could you really recover? And so, we are investing in backup and recovery. And then, hey, any corporation in America is utilizing cloud-based technologies, so helping our company as we move data and systems to the cloud, ensure that we got just as good a security in the cloud as we do have in our own data center. So those are our priorities.
I think I'll add my opinion here too in terms of what is Avangrid doing. Right now we're very focused on third-party risk management. I'll go out on a limb and say we have a pretty darn good cybersecurity program. Certainly as we benchmark, I feel really good about the program. We've taken a lot of that low-hanging fruit away. We've mitigated, we hardened, we've added resilience, we have manual backups, all of that good stuff. And so an adversary going toe-to-toe with Avangrid, maybe, maybe not, but I think the likely enemy avenue of approach is to go through a third-party vendor to get to us. And so our third parties as hardened as we are they doing what they say they're doing as we read the contract and the procurement process? I'm going to go out on a limb and say the answer is no. I think you do need to do a little bit of due diligence. I think you do need to do a knock and maybe take a look at their program a little closer, because that truly is, I think, again, the enemy avenue approach to get into our system, especially if they have some sort of remote access into maybe wind turbines or the renewable side of the house. And China, in particular, on the renewable side, is a difficult problem. We're not going to be up here as corporate security as the Department of No and a bunch of Darth Vader figures to say, no, we can't use this. Business decisions need to be made. We understand that. But going with the cheapest vendor because it costs less, by the time I add all of my compensating measures and my mitigation measures for cybersecurity and national security on top, all of a sudden those solar panels from China aren't necessarily as cheap as you once thought. And so having security, having a prominent seat at the table from the very beginning is absolutely critical, because what you don't want to have happen is at the 11th hour and signatures are going on the contract, there's a full stop because there's a security concern. So bring security in early and often. Spence, how are you guys investing in transmission resilience? And I go back to way back in the day, I mentioned the Metcalf attack earlier with Pacific Gas and Electric. And that day, even though it was the result of SIP 14, that day there were 0 customers without power. It's actually a resilient story. It really is. From a transmission perspective, though, how is Florida Power and Light building resilience from security issues into your system?
So I'm going to start with how have we invested in hardening our system against a natural disaster. And because that philosophy that we've built into that system hardening is really carrying over into our cybersecurity programs. We started by saying, hey, look, the most common part that we need to replace during or after a hurricane or a tornado or adverse weather event is a transmission tower. Let's fix that. So we went to concrete transmission towers. The very last transmission structure that was wood was removed from our system in December of last year. So fantastic story. It took a very long time, right? What we have to do, though, similarly from a cybersecurity perspective, is to take a look at those systems that are most likely to be attacked and come up with ways that we can eliminate them, that we can harden them, that we can reduce the risk by applying mitigating controls, by creating good network segmentation, and to build long-term things like software-defined networks that allow us to reconfigure our network during an attack. As we start to look at those opportunities, we really do also begin to adopt governance programs across our entire enterprise that allow us to assess our susceptibility to an attack on any given day. And the last thing that I'll mention is, look, the nuclear programs in the United States have had this for years on the physical security side, and I think it's a great opportunity for us on the cyber side to look at it is, hey, there's a design basis threat. A nuclear plant must sustain an attack by an active adversary for a period of time, and they have to engineer their systems to be able to withstand that. why aren't we doing the same thing from a cyber perspective? So as we see regulations develop, I would like to see us having design basis threat style regulatory structures where we have to be able to demonstrate through cyber-informed engineering programs like what's been developed by INL that we can withstand, sustain a cyber attack, and continue operations even in a degraded state while that attack is occurring. This is requiring us to spend money in R&D, and it's requiring us to also think very seriously about the portfolio of assets that we have so that we can both harden them as well as engineer them to withstand that cyber attack.
Martin, presumably you guys are having this conversation right now as it relates to transmission and maybe even distribution resilience. So is part of your resilience plan to add more substations to pick up some of that load if one fails? What does that look like?
Yep. Well, you got it. It's aside from the security-related activities, our transmission planning team they're reevaluating where we've got a single line feeding a large chunk of customers. I mean, this West End substation was a great example. They're taking a look and saying, do we need to build a second substation that's a redundant path that could pick up those 45,000 customers? So it's a good partnership between the security team and the transmission planning team, and they will end up building some additional substations. They will end up very likely with additional mobile transformer units that they can roll in an emergency. They are definitely purchasing and staging equipment that is likely to be damaged and ensuring that they have rapid response procedures. So yeah, it's definitely a much bigger effort going on at the company than just those security pieces.
So if I can just throw one last thing in.
Please.
The last thing on how are we investing, the answer is prudently, right? So as we start to think about all of the things that we have to invest in over time, we do have to prioritize. We do have to make sure that we're not gold plating and that we're building something that is going to be a lasting structure for our customers. At the end of the day, all of us are there to keep the lights on for our customers. That's it in a nutshell, and to keep the costs low, right? So that prudent investment is going to be critically important as we move forward. We can't over-harden these systems.
Yeah, and I would advocate too, it needs to be performance-based, right? The last thing we want to do is create a standard that you build it on a Monday, but Tuesday it's already antiquated because technology is moving so rapidly.
That's right.
Manny, and I'm sensitive to the time here, we've been talking for years about physical security and cybersecurity convergence. What is the NERC's kind of opinion on this, the ISAC opinion on this? Have you seen, from an industry perspective, have you seen a gravitation in this direction? I know Duke, Avangrid for certain, has embraced convergence in the organizational model. But what is your overarching impression of industry right now?
Yeah, I think we have embraced convergence, right? And let's face it, the adversaries will take advantage of any opportunity. So, a physical security attack would be a great time to launch a cyber attack. A major storm would be a great time to do this. So again, that's what makes this game very, very hard. That landscape is very complex. And so we think through some of these potential scenarios, and actually our antenna really goes up when we start to see concentrations of activities and start saying, well, yeah, this may be a physical event, but let's not forget that the cyber event could be coming as well, too. At the ISAC, every 2 years, we throw this party that we call GridX. And so GridX 7 will take place in November, and Brian, you're familiar with this. But this is an exercise that is designed to break down the grid. And so first it allows utilities to exercise their own response plans in what we call distributed play. So they're back at their shops and they're running through the scenario and doing that. But then we bring together the leaders of the electricity industry as well as leaders of the federal government and other critical infrastructure sectors like telecommunications and finance. And we lock ourselves in a room and again, break the grid and say, all right, now what do we do, right? What are the restoration priorities? How do we communicate? What do we bring to bear in terms of, emergency capabilities, whether it's, mobile assets, again, the electricity industry, as you know, is so reliant on telecommunications, right? how do we work with them to sort of affect restoration and do those sort of things? So after 3 days of GridX, my hair usually hurts. I've participated in all of them, but they've been very worthwhile exercises in terms of driving activity. The Cyber Mutual Assistance Program that Spencer mentioned came out of one of the GridX exercises. More deliberate collaboration with the natural gas sector and the telecommunications sector came out of GridX. So, we expect that we'll continue to do that as well.
During the first GridX 1 back in 2011, we had 75 participant organizations. I didn't say 75 utilities, I said 75 participant organizations. And so now that number has grown significantly. What are you guys up to these days?
So it's approaching 300 for the distributed play across the United States and Canada. Canada is now participating. And the executive tabletop is about 200 organizations.
I mean, that's great improvement. Martin, you guys own a converged program. From the outside looking in, you were converged, maybe you kind of moved away from it from a little bit, now you're back to converged. Is this home? Is this the right path?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
So when I joined Duke Energy in January 2022, so not too long ago, I would actually say it wasn't converged at that point in time. In December of last year, I was the Chief Information Security Officer. They moved physical security under me. That doesn't mean we've truly converged it. I am absolutely looking at areas that I want to converge, and these will definitely include, for example, our threat intelligence program and some of the less operational aspects like setting and managing our policies, doing the risk management work, some of those. But honestly, I do not think I'm going to have an ability, as much as I would want to, of having, for example, a fusion center that has physical, cyber, and intel together. And a big part of that, my cybersecurity operations center, like many, went virtual during COVID. And I can't get them to come back to the office. And we've had attrition whenever we've tried.
Yeah.
And talking to a lot of peers, I think the ones that had the courage to say, you're an operations center, so you're not going remote, and they didn't, they're still in person. And then the other half of us, we let them go remote, and they can't get them back because these folks are very skilled analysts, and they can get jobs in other places. So we are, under the same leadership. We share information, but I don't believe I have an opportunity to truly converge like I might have thought that I had before COVID. So I'm being realistic about it and converging where it makes sense.
Maybe as a best practice, or
Excuse
certainly a
myself,
start.
sorry.
Thank you, Manny.
Thanks, Manny.
Got to catch a flight. You got to start somewhere. And so every single morning at 0900 hours, we do what's called the DUB, or the Daily Update Brief. And I stole this from my time at DHS. This is a government thing. I did not create it, but every single morning I have IT, OT, physical security, emergency management, insider threat, intelligence, NERC SIP compliance, all on the phone at the exact same time, talking about what just happened in the last 24 hours and what do we anticipate in the next 24 hours. And it applies, I think, a level of transparency. Everyone is moving in the same direction. Everyone understands it. And away from the lexicon, I've been able to remove this statement that I absolutely hate, and that is, well, I didn't know that was happening. And so we've been able to, again, just bring some greater transparency. Maybe that's an opportunity for your security departments to all move in the same direction. Spence, IT, OT, physical convergence. Are we all crazy? You guys haven't moved in this direction. Are you guys happy with how things are working? Your thoughts?
So I've had the opportunity to work in 2 utilities that converged IT, OT, and physical security, and one that has not. And so the opportunity there is really to start looking. I see similarity between the activities that occur in each of those stacks. When we think IT and OT, for instance, IT had a leg up from a cybersecurity perspective because it was baked in practice from a from ITIL or what name your management structure for operations of information technologies. OT, however, was always that technology that sat behind the engineers and they guarded with their lives, right? The intent, though, is as time has gone on, we've seen OT converge from a technology perspective into standard operating systems that still require major databases, that require all of the same networking capabilities that the IT side has. So we're seeing more convergence in the technologies, which is forcing some more standardization around how we secure those assets. On the physical security side, though, what we also see is that there's a lot of convergence around standard processes like intelligence sharing, intelligence gathering and collection. Insider threat has both an IT and a physical security aspect, right? So there are lots of opportunities for, certainly for coordination.
Access control, IP-based cameras?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, there are significant opportunities for collaboration and coordination, regardless of the management structure around it. And I think the one thing I'll say about NextEra Energy is while we are separate organizations, we do not have separate missions. We are aiming for the same thing, and we are partnering very closely together on both sides of the house.
So we can go on for hours, but we're not. So I do want to turn it over to the audience, maybe for one or two questions. I'm already getting the hook and kind of going like this already. So one or two questions. We're not leaving until we get at least one. Yes, sir, right over here.
With IEC 61850, and you start getting switches and equipment that are typically thought of as IT infrastructure on your bulk electric system. I guess what are some of the future challenges that you see as that proliferates more widely across the grid?
So it's a great question. If you don't mind,
Please.
I'll take a shot at this. So key challenges. Number one, we're going to have to deal with substation operations being impacted by the same kinds of both attacks and failure modes that IT networks have experienced for time immemorial, right? So not only is it the cyber attack, but it's all of the problem management that goes around it. And that discipline of problem management that is instantiated into IT really is going to have to be thought of differently in those operational technologies environments. We're going to have to start adopting and adapting to both change management and problem management processes that may not be traditional engineering approaches, but IT's processes are going to have to be faster, right, in order to keep up with the demand and the need. So when I look and I see Dave Weaver here, right, I can imagine Dave in transmission making a statement like, hey, look, it's the middle of the night, it's 3 o'clock in the morning, there's a heck of a storm going on, and I'm having an IT problem. You don't have the luxury to wait until tomorrow morning to respond to that, right? You're gonna have to roll a truck to that substation for service of that switch, or have redundancy baked into the process, right? And those are the kinds of challenges I see us having culturally between two different disciplines that have very similar needs. It's just as we move on, it's the speed of service that's going to be probably the hardest thing to overcome.
Maybe one more question? Yes, sir.
Just a real quick one. You didn't talk much about your AC/DC control center kind of stuff. I mean, to me, that's a huge vulnerability as well, not only from cyber, but also somebody coming in physically and taking over. You could shut the system down, breaking into the building and setting off explosives. All kind of scenarios you can come up with. Some thoughts about that.
Martin, your thoughts on that? I will presume that the type of site that he's talking about is also one of your SIP 14 sites, which is highly protected.
Yep. I shouldn't have failed to mention that in the assessment of, the assessment where we determined we need this additional tier of substation protection, we also said we need to take a look at our ability to secure our energy control centers. And they are CIP-14 sites, and so they are already hardened, but is that good enough? And here's a couple of things that we identified as possibly not good enough. We did not have armed guards, do not have armed guards there. I'm exploring placing armed guards at our energy control centers. We would be able to, for example, if an intruder came in, sever the network connection of that site, fail over to our backup. But when we assessed, do we actually have a rapid procedure to do that? The answer was no. So we're putting in, panic button-like capability for rapid lockout of a potentially compromised facility and failover to another. Both on the physical, hey, hit a lockout button that would prevent folks from physically entering if we see a threat coming, or if a threat's already in there, we've lost the integrity of that center, can we remotely lock it out and transfer control over to another center? So those, unfortunately, very real threat.
Kind of that single point vulnerability, though.
Yeah.
Controls a number of.
You're 100% right, yeah.
Great conversation. Thank you to my panelists. Thank you for having us.
Actually, I'm gonna overrule you on
Sure,
this and
sure.
extend this just a bit more, because I find this discussion absolutely fascinating, and we could do a whole day program
Indeed.
on this alone. I actually have one more question, which is, and unfortunately Manny's not here, but I'm curious to hear all of your perspectives on this. Grid security issues, they're not only coming up domestically, we're seeing definitely that, but internationally, watching what's going on around the world. And in my mind, particularly looking at what's happening in Ukraine with the situation over there. I'm curious as to what extent you all are following, tracking, involved with other organizations, seeing what's happening through that, situation in Ukraine. What lessons do we learn? What concerns are we seeing in terms of vulnerabilities to the grid? Things along that line. Any thoughts on that?
So when Ukraine was invaded many years ago in 15 and 16, respectively, they were running pirated versions of Windows XP. And so they were a little bit antiquated. They were a little bit different, right? Apples and oranges. We're not doing that, I don't think.
No.
However, based off those attacks, they have come into the modern era. Matter of fact, when I was at NERC, we sent people to Ukraine to try and help them. But now, fast forward, we're looking at, frankly, some of the drone attacks that are happening there. And how are drones and the overhead threat, how can they impact our substations here locally? To pivot just slightly on your question, and that is, I think drones are going to continue to be an issue as Amazon sinks billions of dollars and Chipotle really wants to deliver you that burrito to your house. Drones are going to be a problem. And so when they're dropping into the substation or they're dropping things into the substation, we need to have greater visibility of that. Right now, you can go to any security trade show and it is illegal to purchase and buy and deploy those technologies into our substations. Basically, all we can do is have situational awareness. There is a thing flying above this 500 kV substation, and we should probably do something about it. So Charlotte Police Department, go out and investigate. That's the extent of our response at this point. Unfortunately, this is a USG, this is a legislature, a congressional issue. And my concern is somebody is going to die first before this issue is tackled. Thoughts on Ukraine?
So, beginning last year, when the Ukraine situation started to heat up and Russians began amassing on their borders, my team started a hardening process. We immediately escalated our threat level. We continued down the path of assessing ourselves against common attacks, issues that we might expect, given the intelligence that we had on Russian attacks. We also immediately locked down several paths of ingress into our environment. Now, just used a bunch of big words to say, what we did was we went and said, let's clean up a bunch of vulnerabilities we already knew about. Once we did that, we then started monitoring. And when I say monitoring, I get daily briefings on on attacks on Ukraine soil. I see every piece of information that my intelligence team can pick up, both from our government partners as well as from open source information that we monitor constantly. And last but not least, we respond to those things. We can't just let them sit. Once we know about it, we have to do it. We have to fix it because it's a due diligence issue.
Martin?
I'll just double down on the drone situation. We, I talked about a pivoting to technology and not necessarily spending millions of dollars on fencing and walls, because a drone can just fly right over that. It can be carrying a chain that it drops across your equipment, causes it to short out. It could be in and of itself an improvised explosive device. So we do see that as the very, very real sort of next wave of physical sabotage attack, and are pushing our elected officials in the FAA to give us the ability to defend the airspace above our substations with technology that already exists, larger drones that can go capture a smaller drone, radio frequency jamming that can safely land it over here, or my favorite, a water cannon that can shoot the drone out of the sky above your substation. Drones concern me a lot. Yeah.
Thank you very much for indulging me and extending this a little bit. And then everyone, please join me in thanking our panel for a fantastic discussion. We'll take, again, another short 10-minute break while we get the next panel set up, grab a little bit more coffee if it's out there, and we'll get the show on the road.